Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, recently, just a few days ago, said again that we're at a climate breaking point. We were actually at a climate breaking point many years ago. So the breaking points, the most important thing for that would simply be atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration, two-thirds of the heating and 100% of the ocean acidification, both of which are accelerating.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Climate Emergency Forum. I'm your host, I'm Herb Simmens. I'm the author of A Climate Vocabulary of the Future and co-founder of the Healthy Planet Action Coalition. We welcome you to subscribe to our channel and to like this and our other programs that we produced over the years, and also to visit us at our website, climateemergencyforum.org. Today's program is focused on the climate crisis 2024. Are we reaching a breaking point? And what does that even mean? We have today our two distinguished regular guests, Paul Beckwith, who is a climate system scientist from Ottawa, Canada, and Dr. Peter Carter, a retired medical doctor and founder and director of the Climate Emergency Institute and an IPCC expert reviewer. So I'm going to start with you, Peter. Looking back on 2024 and where we are now, are we at a breaking point? And is that even a useful term to think about?
I think it's a good point. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, recently, just a few days ago, said again that we're at a climate breaking point. We were actually at a climate breaking point many years ago. So the breaking points, the most important thing for that would simply be atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration, you know, two-thirds of the heating and 100% of the ocean acidification, both of which are accelerating. The scientists I checked a couple of days ago, they're still very reluctant to say that the global temperature is accelerating, but I mean, it obviously is. You could show the graph to a high school student and they would say that's accelerating. But there we go. We haven't heard actually what the 2024 global temperature increase will be. Looking on the Copernicus prediction, it looks like it's going to be 1.6 degrees C. If it is, then it will be very close. In 20 years, that's about doubled just in 20 years. So global temperature is just going crazy. But I should get back to atmospheric CO2, which is really to be the most important thing. It's now running at 425.4 parts per million. That's for the last month. That's the seasonally adjusted average. It's increased. NOAA got a good headline that over the past 20 years, atmospheric CO2 has increased 11.5%. And as NOAA pointed out, that's a huge record rate of increase. They call that CO2 growth. CO2 growth is continuing to be at least 40% higher than the last year average growth. So we got December growth. That's what the December concentration was compared to a year ago. And it's 3.54. So the CO2 rate of increase has been growing at over 3.5 for practically 18 months now. So, the experts that say they're baffled and they don't understand why the global temperature is soaring so high as it is. Well, CO2 is obviously one reason. Unfortunately, the other reason that I should mention is that it's pretty definite now that the carbon sinks are beginning to weaken. And that's one of the absolutely, yeah, breaking points would be right, Herb. That's an absolute breaking point. It's been known for decades that they would continue to grow to increase their uptake of carbon dioxide. The forests would continue to green, but over a period of time, then the carbon dioxide and global warming effect would start to damage the forest. So we've got that, and there's quite a few papers out now. So that's terrible, terrible news and very definite. This is a beyond emergency, way beyond emergency. The IPCC sixth assessment stated that global emissions have to be put into decline on an immediate basis. They said by 2025 at the latest. There is no push from anywhere to be following what the IPCC has recommended. There's nothing on the horizon, no talk of pushing global emissions into decline right away. It actually seems to be a reality that people are avoiding of anything. Other breaking points, Earth energy imbalance would be one. There's been several papers and follow-ups now that Earth energy imbalance has doubled in 10, 15 years. So that's huge because that's really the gold standard of where the climate system is, as James Hansen has always said for years and years and years. The other one would be radiative forcing, which is the total heat that's been added to the climate system by accumulated emissions. And the greenhouse gas effect of that, only the greenhouse gases, is that radiative forcing has increased over the past 20 years at 3.4 watts per square meter now.
Well, I thank you. I thank you reluctantly because the news is bleak. It's not unexpected. It continues on with the news that you've heard from folks here at this and other channels for the past number of years, but it shows no signs of reversing. With that, let me turn it over to Paul and whatever thoughts you have on are we at a breaking point and what does that even mean to you?
Well, I think, Peter mentioned that we were probably going to peg in at 1.6 degrees Celsius above the so-called pre-industrial, whether that be defined as 1850 to 1900 or 1880 to 1920. And I just want to remind people that, there was warming of 0.15, 0.2 degrees Celsius prior to that from, 1750 to that baseline, which is what the original IPCC numbers of 2 degrees Celsius and 1.5 degree, those targets were based on. I'd like to remind people that, the last 2 years has seen a surge in global temperatures and CO2 level rise, et cetera. And also, I think you can attribute quite a bit of that temperature surge to the reduction of sulfur in commercial shipping fuels by the International Maritime Organization. So instead of temperatures rising 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade, they're now rising at least 50% higher than that, perhaps even double that. So 0.27 to 0.36. And some papers have shown that the numbers may be 0.4 Celsius rise of temperature per decade. So we're definitely accelerating temperature rise as climate policy that we have, even as inadequate as it is now under great threat, of course. We're seeing less engagement on social media, things like Reddit and Facebook and Twitter, and also mainstream reporting on climate change. A lot of the social media networks are becoming cesspools of misinformation. We're losing democratic governments that have some climate policy, however ineffectual it's been, and that's in danger of being wiped out. So climate policies are being hacked and wrecked, and we're getting more countries saying they're going to be petrostates. I mean, the bright spark on the planet is China, I have to say. It's not the US, it's not any countries in the West, it's China, who have greatly accelerated solar power, electrical power generation from solar, and it's going to exceed nuclear next year, and it'll exceed wind the year after. In about 8 years, it'll be probably about 10 times higher than it is today, and it'll surpass all other forms of electrical energy production. So, not to mention the electric cars, et cetera. So that's pretty much irreversible in China now because it makes economic sense to pursue clean energy and to have the batteries and electric cars. So that's the bright spot. There's a lot of very negative spots. I have to mention some of the policies of Trump. I mean, he threatened to pull the US out of Paris. Just a few days ago, he said no more wind power. Windmills will be built in the US, talking like that. He seems to be playing a big game of Risk right now. I don't know if you remember the board game Risk. So, in his thinking, he sees this map of the risk board and he sees, well, here we are, the US. Let's get Canada, let's get Greenland, let's go south and get Latin American countries and Panama, basically take over entire North America economically, is what his view is. By the same token, I think he's saying to Putin that, you take Ukraine, you take Kamchatka, China, you take Taiwan, we just want North America. Like you can see, I hope this isn't happening, but people downplay him, but you have to listen very carefully to what he says. And he's going to be a disaster for climate change. The only bright spark, like I said, is a really big push to renewables, and there's an economic case for it. It's just cheaper and the way to go. So other countries that don't do that, I think, are putting themselves at great economic risk in the future.
Thank you, Paul. Both of you have made such important and compelling points, illustrating and demonstrating the nature of the multiple breaking points, if you will, that we're facing. And it reminds me of in my book, I have an entry called Carbon Tsunami, and I have two dimensions for that. One is the tsunami that maybe and looks more and more likely will occur because of the phenomena that Peter talked about, because of the natural systems turning from sinks to sources, whether it's in the Amazon or the Canadian forest or in permafrost and indeed peatlands, all sorts of physical features because of the nature of biology and chemistry and microbes and all sorts of complicated things that we have to be so concerned about that we don't even have words for it. But the second carbon tsunami is that it's interesting because, you mentioned, Paul, China, and we've talked about the US and maybe the EU a bit, but there's a whole range of sort of emerging middle income countries that are growing very rapidly. Their GDPs are increasing significantly. And unless and until the world finds a way to finance and support their growth in a green sort of way, they're going to be unleashing what the climate scholar Kelly Sims Gallagher calls a carbon tsunami, if you will. Some of the countries she talks about specifically, I'm just reading a few: Indonesia, South Africa, Ethiopia, India, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Mexico, Turkey, Uganda, Tanzania, Egypt, and the Philippines, among others. And so we've got two tsunamis that we're facing, and both of them, for very different reasons, are putting us under peril. And so I guess, the third thing I want to mention, and then I'll turn it back to you, gentlemen, to comment on either what I said or add to what you earlier said, is that the other way to think about breakdown, if you will, or breaking points, is emotionally. In climate anxiety, the surveys show extraordinary high percentages of people, particularly young people, have more and more anxiety about climate. How can one who's aware of this, as we are and so many others are, look at, as Paul alluded to, look at the news and see the Palisades fire going on as we speak, and then the headline right above it or below it is, as Paul said, the President of the United States saying no more wind power. How do you look at that and still keep some degree of sanity? If someone has the answer to that, please let me know, because I'm not sure I can do that. So let me turn it back to you, Peter, for anything you'd like to elaborate on.
Yeah, thanks. To follow up on the renewable energy, then, I mean, that's definitely the good news, right? So wind and solar are still going high, and as Paul mentioned, China actually just put on its grid the first huge multi-renewable clean energy project. It's massive, and they have solar, and they have wind, and they have hydrogen, all in one sort of huge energy park. So there really is great things happening on renewable energy for sure. Clean energy has increased about fourfold in the past 20 years, and it's still increasing faster than ever. We need all the renewable energy we can possibly get online because when things collapse, and they will, because the governments are obviously going to continue to permit more fossil fuel projects and they're going to continue. The government subsidies, by the way, are increasing. It's not just that our governments are subsidizing the deadly effects of the fossil fuel industry, they're subsidizing even more. On the dark side of China, it hasn't cut back on coal production at all. I mean, it has in its policy that it will, but coal is at a record high, coal production and consumption, record high. It's been there for the past 20 years. And in the past 20 years or so, coal production and consumption has doubled. So we've really got to do something about coal, right? We've really got to sort of attack the coal industry and let people know what this means. There's no future at all if we continue burning coal, for Christ's sake. I mean, we've known that for decades and decades. People are interested in fires. There's been a couple of recent studies out that, yeah, it's regional, but world fires are on the increase. There was an interesting report just out recently that tree cover from fires is going down very, very rapidly. There's been a big reduction in the past 10 years on losing tree cover. And of course, the Amazon, of course, is one of the big places about that. So my final point would be, of course, the Amazon. It's been an absolutely horrendous, horrendous, horrible year, the Amazon. The drought continued, the rivers dried up. They're getting some water back now. They're getting some rain and some water back. But the Amazon is not sinking any carbon for us anymore. And, there are studies, and I think the studies are quite right, looking at the Copernicus CO2, the Amazon is actually putting out carbon dioxide more than it's taking in now. So that's awful.
Thanks, Peter. The consequences of the Amazon becoming more of a source than a sink and collapsing, if that's the right word, and it may well be, go well beyond, as we know, I think, but maybe many people don't, beyond the borders of South America. It has a global impact, and so when people wonder why is our weather so strange in X place, it may well be because of something that happens 5,000 miles away, whether it's in the Arctic or the Amazon or other places, which of course makes it fiendishly complex to deal with, but absolutely necessary to do with. I guess the one at least potentially politically bright spot is that there is as I understand it, the current president of Brazil, who's much more aggressive in taking steps to save the Amazon. The COP30 will be in Brazil, in Belém, at the end of this year, in November or so, and one can presume that Brazil will go all out to show a good face. So we can hope that maybe those events will at least have some positive impact on the future of the Amazon. Paul, your thoughts?
Yeah, when people talk about collapse, they basically have seen a lot of Hollywood movies where something overnight collapses. But in terms of societies and civilizations and democracy, collapse isn't a single chop of the axe. It's more like death by a thousand cuts. And different countries and different regions of the world are, of course, affected differently and have different levels of resources economically and planning in advance. So the resilience level is hugely different among different countries. So, for example, most people are aware that Puerto Rico, the entire place, lost electrical power a few years ago, and that also happened again this year for several days. And the entire island of Cuba lost electrical power just recently. It makes major news stories when it happens, but it doesn't make a major news story when when the power is restored, the electricity is restored. You have to go searching for that. I think it was off for several days. So the resilience level is different for all different places. So collapse isn't just an instantaneous thing around the planet. People need to realize that it's a process that is ongoing, and it's getting worse and worse, and it's accelerating as the climate system disruptions accelerate. And a couple of the major climate disruptions, of course, everybody is aware of the rising temperatures, the increase of extreme weather events, the declining ice and snow cover in the Arctic. There's been a couple excellent reports on the state of the cryosphere is one of them, which I just did a long video on, and another one is on the state of the Arctic in particular, which I'll be doing a video on shortly. So those things are ongoing. I mean, the recent research is saying we could have a blue ocean event, no sea ice in the Arctic, say within 3 years, or it might take a bit longer. But also there's a wild card if the AMOC, if the ocean current circulation slows down first, then we're not going to see a blue ocean event in the Arctic. It's going to get very cold in the Arctic and Northern Europe and could stay that way for quite a number of decades if the ocean currents fail. We don't think too much of the Southern Hemisphere, but the whole thermohaline ocean current circulation system is reconfiguring, as is the atmospheric circulation system, the jet streams, etc., which most people are more aware of. We've talked about that quite a bit. But the largest ocean current in the world is the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, because there's no continent to block it, and it's about 173 sverdrup. A sverdrup is the flow rate of every river in the world combined. So it's huge amounts of water flowing around Antarctica, and that's expected to slow maybe 20% by 2050, according to the most recent paper. And that will reduce the Antarctic bottom water, which is very cold water that descends down to the abyss because there's just too much fresh water coming off Antarctica. So this will then feed back in and probably have major impacts on the entire ocean circulation system, including the AMOC. So all of these things are massive tipping points of the climate system. They're going to make it difficult for humanity to grow food and get enough water. And they're going to be a real test of human resilience on this planet around the world.
Well put. And they all, in order to address them, they all require a multilateral cooperation. No country, no people, no geography in a particular area can address them unilaterally. Our species better figure out real quickly how we can work better together. It's just, in some ways, it's just as simple as that. I think we're still at the point where humanity has the intellectual ability, has the physical resources, has the organizational resources to tackle these. We've seen these in the past, unfortunately, usually in wars and other major, or going to the moon. And though it's a cliche to say it's just a matter of political will, at some level it is just a matter of political will. And with the right leaders and the right awareness, and I don't want to sound Pollyannish, but I think this is not beyond the realm of impossibility to address. But time is running out. Time has run out. We're on the verge of time running out. To get back to the theme of our session today, we are near, at, or beyond breaking points, and we've talked about any number of them today. So let me turn it back to Peter for any other comments you'd like to make.
On
Go
a
ahead.
personal basis, I just want to so agree with Herb's point that it's hardly ever made that we cannot expect to have a negotiating settlement to put our emissions into rapid decline all the time countries are making war against each other. So the establishment of international peace is absolutely a prerequisite, and that's not looking good. But we all should be working towards peace, all of us.
It's very important for people to recognize within themselves, in order to take action and to talk about this and to be effective as a human being, productive, we need to be very, very cognizant of our own mental health, make sure that we take time to, get the exercise we need, make sure that we don't want to get into a really negative frame of mind saying the world's going to end and throw our hands up, right? So there's a lot of good literature about how climate change is negatively affecting mental health, and how climate change is negatively affecting economies and negatively affecting inflation, which is very rarely mentioned, right? So those things are just important to keep in mind.
Okay, well, we've heard today multiple dimensions of the breaking points that we are experiencing and will continue to experience unless and until the world, to put it very crudely, gets its act together. Most of us who are on this video, or at least a couple of us, were in Baku. We didn't see much evidence of that there. You can watch some of our videos where we talk about that in more length and in more depth. But I want to thank our guests and our regular participants, Peter and Paul. And for those of you who are watching, please leave comments, subscribe, like, follow Climate Emergency Forum, and stay tuned for our next program. Thank you so much.